What is going on today, guys? This is Daniel with Cuervo ATV. Today we are talking about the speed limiter and what it does. Speed sensor, speed limiter, max RPM, or max mile an hour limiter. So let's discuss what it is and why. So Yamaha puts a speed sensor in the back of the block that sits down here right behind that pipe there in the case. There is a 3-wire sensor that plugs in this group of harnesses there. It'll be a 3-wire white connector. And that is the sensor to tell the ECU how fast the output shaft is going. So it only knows how fast the output shaft is going, and it looks at it, or looks for that sensor input in fifth gears. But it does look for that sensor input all the time. So the only time it's really affecting anything is in fifth gear, and it knows it's in fifth gear due to the output signal. Of how fast that sensor is seeing a signal based off of the tooth count. So you could be in fourth gear, and if you had a bike that was turning way more RPM than stock, then the ECU would think that it's in fifth gear. So regardless of that, if you change your sprockets and go to a bigger front sprocket and a smaller rear sprocket, the ECU doesn't know that you made that change. So you can get a higher top speed with just changing gearing without affecting anything on the ECU side. So what is the speed sensor doing beyond giving that input to the signal? What's the ECU doing with that signal? So basically what the ECU is doing is it is pulling timing in fifth gear. So it's only pulling timing above about 6,500 RPM, and depending on which year will kind of change what how much power it's pulling out. So basically a stock power band, stock camshaft, it's going to make peak power say about like 6,200 RPM, and after that point is where in fifth gear the speed sensor and ECU is pulling timing, and it greatly reduces power output at that RPM. So regardless, on a stock machine, it's tapped out either way. The camshaft is done, power is falling off. But in fifth gear, it just falls off that much faster. And regardless of what you say, some guys will say, oh, I did 90 mile an hour in fifth gear, whatever they think. Like, it's all based off of power output to the ground. So we are talking about timing retard, not a speed limiter. It doesn't stop at a certain mile an hour. It pulls timing at a certain RPM in fifth gear. So based off of that, how do we go and eliminate it or trick it to think that there is that it's not in fifth gear, or get rid of it so it's not pulling timing? Well, there's two solutions. If you look up baby blue wire mod, there is a wire that goes to the ECU that's a baby blue color, and you can cut it and ground one side of it. I don't recommend doing that. There's no reason to be cutting on your wire harness, because there's a much simpler way to do that, and that is to, if we look at this bike here, factory clutch lever assembly. If you pull this connector out, there's a detent to push on with the screwdriver underneath. You pull that sensor out and zip tie it up out of the way, leave it connected to the bike. Basically, that is allowing the bike to start in gear. So this is a safety clutch switch. It's basically so you don't run yourself over pushing the start button. So what's going on there, I'll show you here. When you're in neutral, Okay, well this bike don't want to do anything. That's cool. I think it's got a bad key switch actually. Okay, so now it's working. So you have to have, when you're in gear, you have to have that clutch pulled in. That's what that switch is doing. You have to have it pulled in so you can start the bike. When you're in neutral, it's going to start without it pulled in. Like neutral safety, clutch safety switch, you don't run yourself over. So if you look at this bike, it has an aftermarket lever and that switch is missing. So if we key it on, it's in neutral, it's going to want to turn over. If we put it in gear, this bike's going to jump forward if you go to start it when it's in gear. So that's what that clutch switch is for. But if you pull that out of the housing, have it zip tied up like how this bike is, that is going to eliminate your safety switch, you know, its actuation so you don't run your leg over. But it is also going to eliminate the 5th gear timing retard. So that is the simplest, easiest way to do it. Most often people do it out of not even knowing. They'll put an aftermarket perch on there without a switch in it, and they'll leave the wire hooked up and have no idea that it actually changed ignition mapping or what the ECU is doing. So that is one way to do it. The other way is Msd Blaster for the 06 through 14 bikes eliminates the 5th gear speed limiter. In its software, there's a setting for it that says minimum timing, and you would set that at 32 degrees, and then it won't pull timing. So 2015 and above bikes. Couple options here. I know we're getting long in this video, but there is no other way to do it than that. So 06 through 14 bikes, if you disconnect the sensor, it's going to throw a check engine light eventually. And when it does that, it will pull timing in every gear. So if that check engine light is on because the speed sensor is disconnected, it is pulling timing in every single gear. But what you don't know, and what most people don't know, is it is actually pulling timing in every gear at some point before the check engine light goes on. So it was kind of weird one I figured out. Sometimes we experiment with some stuff and see what's going on, but it will pull timing before it ever throws the check engine light. So best way to do that on these is just the clutch switch deal and be done with it. On the 15 and above bikes, this one isn't one, but on the 15 and above bikes, the wire harness is very similar, but the ECU is different. It is still going to pull timing in 5th gear. It does it at a more aggressive rate. The motors are quite a bit more disturbed by it, but pulls it at about the same range and causes the same problem. Now on the 15 and above bikes, the clutch switch does not do anything for it. That does not affect the ECU, how the lockup or the lockout relay is for your clutch switch. All that is all wired quite a bit differently, and that ECU is different. So 15 above. On the Empire dual exhaust, how they have the exhaust routed, it gets too close to the speed sensor, and they pull that speed sensor out, put a plug in it, and they tell you to leave it connected to the harness. Now eventually that is going to throw a check engine light. So same deal. Once it throws a check engine light, it's going to pull timing. So you don't want that. So temporarily, a temporary fix for the guys wanting to get rid of the speed sensor, say you're drag racing the bike, you can unplug the sensor, that 3-pin connector. Now that is up to you safety wise. If you're pushing these things, I don't recommend doing that. I don't recommend pulling these bikes in 5th gear. especially on a stock crank. Pushing RPM for a long period of time is going to lock up the cranks. So that is up to you to decide if you want to do that or not. But on the dyno, we do that so we can get proper load in them and really see what kind of torque they're making, get a longer run on them. If we're not going to put like a big tire on them and run them in fourth gear, or if we don't want to change the gearing to properly load a bike, depending on what horsepower output the bike is. So the quick fix for that is disconnect it, make your runs, plug it back in later so the ECU can see that input. So it's not like on every fire up, it's not checking for that input. It's every once in a while, it's going to check and make sure that sensor is there, and then throw a check engine light based off of that. So 15 to 20 bikes. Now 2021, I just got one in, finally worked on one here locally. It was kind of odd. Took a long time to see one here. I ran back-to-back runs, two similar builds. They were both like 73 horsepower, high compression stock bore, plus one head. One was a 2015, one was a 21. I noticed the fuel pump was different on the 21 and a few other things. But what I didn't know initially is they changed how aggressive the fifth gear speed limiter was. So it is still pulling timing on the 2021s and assuming 22s, but not as aggressive. So it doesn't sound the same. On the 15 through 20 bikes, they are very, they sound bad when they're on the dyno with the fifth gear. With the speed sensor plug-in, they sound really bad. They get up and they kind of gurgle in that high RPM, and they're not happy. So I noticed the 21 didn't do that. So I did some back-to-back pulls on it, two similar bikes, two similar builds, and what was up with it was the 15 to 20 bike, it lost about 4 horsepower or so from everywhere above like 6,500 RPM. Just really crapped out up top. The 21 bike, same exact build, identical parts on everything, speed sensor disconnected or connected. Disconnected, they made the same power within half a horsepower of each other. But connected, the 2021 bike only lost like a horse and a half from like 6,500 to 7,500 RPM. So it is a different programming in that ECU, and it is not much of a deal to be concerned about. So at that point, it's very minimal losses. Power band stayed very close to with it plugged in. So I would say if you have a 2021 bike, 2022 bike, like don't even worry about that fifth gear speed limiter. From what I've seen, it's not going to make huge changes for you. So more on speed sensors. If you have a bike that is being dyno tuned and that light is on, means that it's already pulling timing. So you take a 15 plus bike, you go to get it dynoed, you did some mods, you have, say, the Empire duals on there, and your check engine light is on, and you tune it like that, and whoever's tuning it adds timing back in it. Now if you go and you plug in that sensor or fix that concern, or say you swap the ECU, put an ECU on there before it recognizes it, now you're going to have probably, depending on what the tuner did, probably 6 or 7 degrees too much timing in that bike, and naturally it'll blow a head gasket or detonate or crack the case or something of that sort. Run really poorly because of it. So that is something to watch out for. It's not just it's a check engine light, it's fine. It can cause quite a few other issues as a result. So something to look out for. Every bike we get on the dyno, if it doesn't have plastics on it, we plug in the dash just to verify they don't have a check engine light. Because You can't tune one of these bikes properly if it does have a check engine light. You can try, but if you miss that step and there's a light on, it's going to cause you a lot of problems. So that is what I would say the majority of what I know about the speed sensors and the timing retard that it is doing, and everything you really could or shouldn't do with it. So as we get more information on the 21s and 22s, I'll post a little bit about that. I had that one bike in. I need to get a few more in different configurations in as the 21 and 22s and see how much it's pulling as far as power goes, and get some more information on that. But all right, that is it. This is one of my longest videos. A lot to talk about, a lot to cover on that. Don't do the baby blue wire mod. Don't chop into your wire harness. It's not necessary. It's just going to cause you problems and troubles down the road. So that is it. We will talk to you soon.